ورسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا ورزقا طيبا اللهم فقهنا في الدين اللهم فقهنا في الدين رب زدني علما رب زدني علما رب زدني علما آمين يا رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan, warm welcome to you all lovely ladies for coming here on a Sunday evening as seekers of knowledge. Alhamdulillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran in Surah Al-Mujadila, ayah number 11, يَرْفَعِ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَالَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْعِلْمَ دَرَجَاتٍ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to exalt the status of those people who have Iman plus knowledge. So Alhamdulillah, we have the Iman, and then as we become the seekers of knowledge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise our status, inshallah. Another beautiful hadith I wanted to share, as we are all seekers of knowledge. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهَ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes good for someone, He bestows upon him the understanding of the deen. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding of the deen. Allahumma faqihna fi deen. It's a great blessing, alhamdulillah, that we find time to learn about our deen. And today we have Sister Ruwa Romman to help us seek more knowledge and to gain confidence as a Muslimah. So she's going to take over from here. Bismillah, let's get started. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a lot of barakah in this learning session. Just to have you focus, we'll have a short quiz in the end. So you can take down notes if you have, even the phones work, there's a notes app on that, so you don't need a safer, let's save some paper today. Okay, Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. That works. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. How's everybody doing? Are you ready for a new week? Tomorrow's Monday. Who's ready for school to be over? I heard a yes back there. You're gonna just cheer. How many weeks do you guys have left? 3, 4. Yeah, it's getting very warm, and Ramadan is around the corner, which is, I feel like every year, obviously it comes earlier every year, but earlier and earlier. So my name is Ruwa. For those of you that don't know me, I graduated from Oglethorpe University in May, literally not even a year ago, and I had majored in politics and English and a little bit of philosophy, and so I did a lot, probably too much, but I kind of want to share with you kind of my story and how I got to where I am today, and kind of give you some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way from those who have mentored me, supported me, etc., to kind of get me to this point, to be able to stand in front of you and have the honor to speak to you. So it kind of, to me, I think the most sort of life-changing event that happened in my life wasn't when I moved to America, because I was so young. When you're that young, usually it's all you really think about your entire world is just your home and then school. So not that much change. I went home, I went to school, I learned a new language, but I don't really remember learning that language. All I remember was at one point they finally kicked me out of ESOL because I kept skipping chapters, and I was like, just let me read. All I wanted to do was read. I was like, just let me read and I'll figure out the rest. But it was actually when I moved in middle school. We lived in Fulton County, so for those of you that live in Fulton County, it's very diverse. It's more diverse every day. I was doing everything. I was on the basketball team. I was in the orchestra. I was doing every honors class you can think of. So I would get there at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd leave at maybe 2 or 3 hours after everyone else left, just from practices and different clubs. And then my parents decided to move to Forsyth County. And that was the year that I was going to 8th grade. And as you guys know, moving in middle school, especially that last year, is very hard because you're supposed to kind of go through 8th grade and then go to high school together. I was at Taylor Road, so if you're at Taylor Road, you just go down the street to Chattahoochee, kind of this one big mass of people.
And but I moved to Forsyth County, and back then, me and 2 other girls were the only non-white people in my entire 8th grade class. Literally, it was just us. And I remember I decided to wear hijab when I was 11. This was before like I fully understood like spirituality and things like that, but I really wanted to copy my mom. I thought she looked beautiful in it. I thought it was, to me, it seemed like her hijab was like the thing that centered her and anchored her in her, just the way that she moved herself in the world around her. So I decided to wear hijab in 6th grade. I moved in 8th grade to this county that, one, they'd never met a Muslim person before. First African American kid I saw was sophomore year of high school. Not even 8th grade, not even 9th grade, sophomore year. Like, to them, the idea of a Muslim woman was just like completely like blew their mind. And so we started school, and they would look at me like, "You speak English? How do you speak English? Like, your eyes are green. Why aren't your eyes brown? Why is your skin so light?" Like, they asked me I'm like, I don't know, like genetics. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure what happened there. And so it was very difficult. And I think the most difficult part was, I have 3 younger siblings, so there was a point where one of them was in elementary school, one of them was in middle school, and I was in high school, and my mom was spending like 2 or 3 hours in carpool lines. So finally I said, okay, my brother's now in high school with me, let's take the bus. As exciting as the bus seems, it was probably the worst thing that I could have done because it made everything so much harder. We would like drive by my house, and people would go, "Look, there's the bomb lab over there," and like, I mean, everything. Like, they called me like terrorist. They called me some really, really awful names. And subhanAllah, like, this is the part that I still don't know how to explain to anybody. When we moved in 8th grade, my mom started including us in the halaqah at, I think first it was Hamza, then RCM, then back to Hamza. It was like this like back and forth. And so we started doing this halaqah, and it was like the first time that I really got to hang out with like a group of Muslim people that were my age, like same kind of idea, but they couldn't fully understand what living in Forsyth County was like. I mean, that's how, like even when I started commuting in college, like going from Forsyth to Atlanta was in and of itself a cultural whiplash, because the people were just completely different. Like, in one, people just like look at you like you're this alien thing. In another, they're like, "Oh, it's just another different person in the city. Great, you know, it's not that big of a deal." And so, so at that time, like normally, like I've seen kids get bullied before, and normally they completely break down. They're so upset, and it upset me. But I remember I never actually cried in front of other people. That was, even though I'm a very like emotionally expressive person. I'm not saying like don't cry in front of people, but it was just like subhanAllah, there was like the strength. I don't know where it came from, that I just didn't cry in front of them. If they were really mean, like if they say, "Oh, you're just a terrorist," I'll say, instead of like getting upset about it, I'll say, "Well, why do you think I'm a terrorist?" Like, I actually ask a question just to try to like probe it, you know? Some of them would say things like, "Well, my parents told me you were." And others would say things like, "Well, I heard that your people do this and this and this," right? And it's funny because once you ask a question, it completely diffuses the situation, because they don't expect it. They expect, like, if somebody pushes you, your first instinct is to want to like push them back, right? But what it's got to do, that's going to just escalate the violence and the conflict. And so, subhanAllah, in some like really strange way, I started just asking questions. I was already asking questions in school. I love learning. Asking questions, learning was like something I wanted to do. I was like, I want to figure out psychologically why people do the things that they do. That wisdom didn't come from me. My parents were incredibly supportive in the sense of making sure that like I didn't need anything, but at the same time, they didn't fully understand what it was like to grow up here, like be completely different while completely the same. Because, you know, everyone's a teenager at the end of the day. Everybody's going through your typical, like, I want to fit in, I want to do whatever. And so it's like this strange, like, to this day, like, as much as I want to, like, try to, subhanAllah, it's like such a huge blessing that I was able to stop and ask people questions. And so that was kind of where my journey started, was sort of being able to look at somebody and ask them about why they think the way that they do. And then I started doing interfaith work, and what that constituted was basically going with people from different faiths, whether it was other churches, synagogues, temples, jama'at, you name it. We would all go, and we would do like some kind of service project, whether it was feeding the homeless, or sorting books for Africa, or there was an organization called MedShare where you sort medical supplies, and they take those medical supplies and they send them to countries that need them. Like something as simple as gloves have shown like a rate of actually patients living through their surgeries by like something like 50 or 70%. Like it was an enormous difference. we found out the story of a guy who was so low on surgical gloves, he learned how to do surgeries one-handed. I mean, that's the kind of, like, it kind of brought my world from, like, I'm so sad, like, no one is accepting me, to, oh my gosh, there's so much bigger problems out there that it was like, okay, I have to figure out how to take care of myself so I can start taking care of these other people. So I started learning, like, so one, I asked a lot of questions from people around me. Why do you think that the way they do? Why do you see me as a terrorist? Things like that. And then I took it a step further, and I made sure to learn about myself. So going to halaqas, for example, I could learn new hadiths, new Quranic verses that were like, okay, well, you're telling me my religion is violent, but here's what we just learned in my Saturday halaqah. You know what I mean? Like, it seems so simple because it's things that my mom taught me, like, growing up, and because she homeschooled us, she taught us Arabic, she taught us Quran, everything. But at the same time, having it, like, reinforced, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, you hear the same thing over and over again, it kind of gets repeated, but then you realize it's not just getting repeated for whatever reason, it's because when everyone around you is saying the exact same thing over and over and over again, maybe you do need to hear the opposite thing over and over and over again. And it kind of goes back to this, like, psychology and neuroscience. I was not a psychology major at all, it was just something I was very interested in. And I learned that as people are exposed to the same thing, they're more likely to start fitting it into their frame of reference. And so I needed a better frame of reference to address the bad frame of reference that people around me had. And again, not everybody is like that. Some people are quiet leaders. Some people just don't want, like, there was a Hindu friend that I had. She was obviously Hindu. She had very brown complexion. She also dealt with bullying, but on her side, she was like, I don't want to talk to you about my faith because you're just going to make more fun of it. You know, she's like, I'd rather respect it in my own space, and that's it. And that's perfectly fine. Telling people to respect you and just leave you in your own space, that's totally fine. On my end, I realized that's kind of where my purpose comes in. In a weird way, I found out what I want to do for the rest of my life-ish. And so I started doing some training with the Islamic Speakers Bureau and eventually joined them as a speaker. So if your teacher ever asks about a good organization that can give presentations during class, that's a really, really great one to look for because they fix their presentations every year, they update them, they do all of this training, incredibly professional people. So I took their training, but then I also took my studies very seriously, so I was taking, like, honors. I ended up in the IB program, 11th and 12th grade. And I remember, like, my friends were like, why would you do IB? That's crazy, you're gonna die, like, it's awful, like, don't do that, because it's very difficult, it's college level in high school. And I said, because I feel like there's so much, like, I feel like there's this surface, and then there's down here, and then there's, like, something all the way deep down here. And if I want to get to the very depth of it, I have to take the next step. So what was available to me? Some people can only do AP. I was like, I have IB. I gotta do the International Baccalaureate program. So I did it. It was so difficult. It was so hard. It was the first time I ever failed a test, like, in my life. It was the first time I ever failed an assignment in my life. Like, it was the most bizarre experience. I was like, am I stupid? Like, this whole time, did I just not know? Like, but that was also when I learned that in a weird way, failure is also the only road to success. And so you can't really succeed and you can't really learn if you don't fail miserably. And I literally mean it, miserably. Because at the end of the day, the people who succeed, everyone fails, okay? That's a blanket statement. Everybody makes mistakes. Another blanket statement. What I've noticed, what distinguishes sort of the people that end up moving forward and the people that end up staying where they are those who end up stuck in that failure, saying, you know, I failed this, okay, I'm done with it. I gotta try something else. There's no way I could do this. That's it. We're done. I loved math, and then all of a sudden math stopped making sense to me. And had I, like, stopped then and there, I would have hated math forever. And yet now people are asking me to do them in math. I'm like, you know, I'm a politics major, right? Like, math is not something I do anymore. And so it's like, it's kind of like these two very, like, congruent lessons, which was always learn, but then don't take things so personally that they end up breaking you. Because at the end of the day, you're going to break, but it's like, is it going to be a permanent break where you end up healing and taking the pieces and making something better and a more beautiful picture? Or are you just going to break and leave the pieces on the floor and either try to reinvent yourself or let everything that was good about you go? And so a lot of it is, like, internal, a lot of it is external. And so, you know, at this point, we're in high school. At this point, I'm in the National Baccalaureate program. It's about 60 of us out of the 300 seniors that are there. And we were all people that loved learning. You know, none of them were Muslim, none of them were Arab. in fact, even back then, the majority of them were white. But I noticed that if we focus on the things that made us similar, our love of learning, the way we learn, and respect in our discourse and our discussions and our differences, that made a world of difference. And so all of a sudden I went from being the unpopular kid in school, nobody really wanted to talk to me, nobody really wanted to sit with me, to the person that would plan group projects and the person who would, oh, I'm walking in the cafeteria, I don't have anybody to sit with. Oh, there's Ruwa, let's all sit at her table. It wasn't just one person, it was just two people. It was, I know I seem different to you, I know I'm completely different to you, but let me tell you a little bit more about myself first as a person, and let me tell you a little bit more about my faith, because that's what makes me the person I am today. So I noticed that if you kind of start from that point, rather than saying, I'm not this, I'm not that, you focus on what you actually are, it really changes the conversation, because for them, they're like, they went off to college and they send me messages like, I was in class the other day and this person was saying this about Muslim people, and I turned around and I said, well, I knew this girl and she said that's not true. And it's like, they wouldn't have cared enough to do that had they not known me as a person. It's one thing to know something is wrong. It's another to be passionate about it enough to stand up and say this is wrong. And I'm sure you guys know this, it's really hard to stand up to people that don't like you. It's even harder to stand up to your friends, because you don't want to be the unpopular person. You don't want to be the person that says, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this. And they're like, no, we're a group of people, we're going to do this together. You know what I mean? Like, I was the odd one out, like, almost all the time, no matter where I went. Kids are members, I was annoying and weird sometimes. And but you kind of learn to grow into yourself. And so, if I could kind of look back and tell myself one thing, it's like, calm down, you'll grow into being comfortable in your skin. You'll grow into being, into understanding who exactly you are and what you're supposed to be. I thought my options were become a doctor, become an engineer, or become a lawyer. I thought those were my three options. And as I grew older and kind of got into this passion of mine, which is my real passion, is to bring people together through dialogue. That's my, if you ask me what my real passion is, it's how do I create communities that work together in a way that's beneficial to the entire community while also remaining true and respectful to each person's identity. Because what happens in the world right now is people join communities and they lose parts of themselves in order to be accepted in that community. What I'm trying to learn and trying to find is, how do you create that community while keeping those identities intact? And so that's where interfaith work comes in. A lot of people say interfaith work is about dumbing down religion to the point that you only focus on the similarities. My argument is no. Interfaith work is about learning that you have all these differences. I want to know what those differences are. Tell me about them so I know how to respect them. Like, oh, you're fasting this month, but I'm not fasting. How do I make sure that you don't pass out during our service project? You know what I mean? Like, things like that, while at the same time going, but wait a minute, we all want to do service. We're all called in our faith to serve and help our community and do good. So I graduated in 2011 from high school, and that year was probably the second hardest so far, because I had no idea what school I was going to. I was the first one in my immediate family to go to college in the United States, so none of my siblings had gone, none of my parents had gone to college here. There was college in Jordan. And so, the idea of a big school, small school, what do you want to study was just so intimidating. And I finally decided on this tiny little school called Oglethorpe University. It looks like a little castle. And the reason I picked it was it's a liberal arts school, and what that means is it's small classes, so you're not in an auditorium of 300 people. And as somebody who gets distracted very easily, everyone's like, oh, you're so studious, you get great grades. No. I'm so bad at focusing, it's awful. I'm like, oh, look, it's beautiful outside. Oh, look, I gotta do this project instead. I'm just all over the place. And so I needed some kind of mentorship with my advisors and professors in order to do well. So I learned there are actually schools like that, and Oglethorpe was one of them. So I go to Oglethorpe, and lo and behold, once again, I'm another super minority. Maybe there was one other girl who wore hijab, but she was already a senior and about to graduate. I was the only one there who identified openly as a Muslim person. It was like going from high school back to square one. But I went to college and I realized, you know what? In college, everyone is there to learn too, and that made it even easier. So before I even registered as a student, I get an email going, hey, I heard you're really into interfaith work. Do you mind helping us out with this staff? It was staff, faculty, and student council on interfaith. And I'm like, yeah, I'll come in and check it out. I thought, oh, they just need another student there. I get there, 20 minutes into the meeting, the director looks at me and goes, so we haven't heard anything from you yet. I'm like, well, I haven't even started classes. Like, I haven't even registered. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk. And she looks at me and she goes, no, we need your opinion. And next thing I know, I'm leading it. And I started an organization called Coexist Oglethorpe. And what it does, same idea. Our first event was a panel on 9/11 to discuss what faiths say about violence. And not just what they say about violence, but how do we move past the conversation of violence? Because faith isn't just about violence. It's about so much more. Religion is about so much more. And so it went from, let's talk about what Islam is not, to what Islam actually is. A beautiful change. Like, next thing I know, everyone's wearing Coexist shirts at Oglethorpe. We had, because it's only 1,200 students, so to do an event that brought in 120 students was like, oh my gosh, like, what is this club? I want to join. Like, it was like the craziest thing. And we ended up doing this organization, and by the end of it, we ended up with the Muslim kids now had a place to pray on campus, which is something unheard of because there isn't even a chapel. I was working closely with another student. She is actually Hindu, and she took over the organization and made sure to like figure out exactly where the Qibla is in the new room. I was like, how did you know what a Qibla is? Like, I know you know Muslims pray 5 times a day, but how did you know? She's like, oh, I just saw you playing this thing on your phone one time, and you turned it, and then you stopped, and I like went online and I searched why, and like next thing I know, she put up like a little poster in the room, because it's like a room that's spaced out. It's like part of it that's a small like what we call reflection space for students to pray and sit, and the other part is for actual like meetings and clubs and everything. So if anyone is actually there to pray, it's either you have to stay silent or leave. And I went in there like 2 or 3 months ago, and I saw right there, it was like a sign that said Qibla, and I was like, why would you do that? Like, you're Hindu, like, you know, this is not something that's, you're not even responsible for that. If a Muslim kid needs to find out which direction to pray, they can find that out. And she's like, well, but what if their phone turns off? You know, some things that I didn't even think of. And I'm like, I felt my heart, I was like, oh my gosh, this is, I think that was the first time I realized that even though there were so many people that kept saying things like, oh, you're a terrorist, oh, like, your people do this, oh, your people do that, there were also people that were listening to my responses that I didn't even know were listening to my responses. And so this seems like this fun fairy tale of a story, right? Like, oh my gosh, she's so strong, she's whatever, but I don't say that to point out, like, the mistakes that I didn't make. I say this because we are people. Every single one of us in this room is people. But unfortunately, we are also, I feel like, a lot of times, Muslims, especially women who wear hijab, are set on this pedestal, right? They're like expected to act a specific way, expected to behave a specific way, while at the same time, like at the time I was a growing teenager, like I still, like, there were some things I wanted to do, there were some things that I was like, I wanted to laugh with my friends and hang out with them, and, you know, I didn't like shopping so much, that wasn't something I enjoyed, but, you know, whatever, like, there were some things I enjoyed that other kids my age enjoyed, and so it's like, how do I reconcile me needing to be up here while also understanding that in my nature as a person, I'm still down here? And that was the hardest part. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the things I noticed is wherever I went, I found a way to surround myself with people that supported me. They're not always going to be allies that are so obvious, people that look like you or behave like you or dress like you. They might be allies that are going through the same thing in a completely different sphere, right? So again, like this, my Hindu friend that I told you about from high school, she was being bullied too, and she had no idea how to stand up for herself until she met me. But I didn't know how to stand up for myself, and subhanAllah, it was just something, like I said, it was just something that happened, something that either my nature, my personality, I don't know, I really to this day I can't give you the answer. All I can tell you is always surround yourself with allies and always pay attention to the people around you, because you don't know how good they are for you. The other thing is, if you notice yourself feeling depleted around somebody, like if you're around somebody all the time and they just always put you down, or you feel upset after you hang out with them, or you feel like you have to change because of them, be incredibly careful of that company. I'm not saying make enemies, I'm not saying don't talk to them, but at the same time, don't invest so much of yourself that you end up with nothing left. Because you can't help the world around you if you don't help yourself first. And I don't mean like be selfish, I don't mean like, you know, what's a good example? Like if you had the option to, like I just had a friend of mine who ended up in the hospital. Her family lives down in Columbus, and so she didn't have anybody, she's in college. And I had the option of just, you know, going to work, and I was really tired, I was going to go home, or I go pick her up from the hospital and take care of her, right? In that moment, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer. You kind of have to go help them, right? But if, for example, you're sick too and you're in the hospital too, you should probably take care of yourself first, because you can't take care of the other person if they're not, you know, if you yourself don't have the physical ability to take care of them. But that also goes to spirituality as well. One of the things I noticed, especially when I got to college, was I was so focused on like the work around me. Like I had to plan this service project, I had to plan this panel, I had to make sure I prepared for this talk, I had to make sure I did this. That instead of like actually paying attention to my salah, I would like rush through it because I gotta get to that next project. You know, for me it was like I need to tell people about what Islam is. Like they need to know, and it's like they need to know it's not this, they need to know it's not that. But at the same time, it really wasn't even benefiting me anymore because that same thing that I was trying to protect was also being affected by my actions. You know what I mean? And so when I say take care of yourself, I don't just mean physically, I also mean spiritually, mentally, emotionally, because it does weigh on you. After a while, when you hear somebody tell you, you know, all Muslims are terrorists, or especially now with the median election cycle, like, oh, well, this guy's running for president, and he said it, so it has to be true. Right? If he's gaining in the polls and people are cheering for him, it has to be true. We know it's not. But again, it's so hard to fight the majority on this one. So what do you do? Again, you lead by example, right? You lead by taking a step back, and if it gets to a point where you just really want to either yell back or you want to get really angry, take a moment and walk away. I remember when I was younger and people told me to walk away from a situation, I'm like, how do you do that? Like, do you just... Like, how do you walk away? Like, I'm so invested in this. Like, I really, really want to fight you back. How do I walk away? And I kid you not, it's literally as simple as turning around and walking away. like when I was 12 or 13, I could not, like, my mind could not wrap itself around this idea that I could tell somebody, hey, I can't do this right now, and literally walk away. And it's a lesson that I kind of wish I learned like 7 years ago, because it would have... I'm the kind of person who's like, no, I gotta prove that you're, like, I gotta prove to you that I'm right. Like, you need to know that I'm right, and here's why I'm right, and, like, I'll present to you facts and research, and, like, and it'll literally become an obsession. And then I realized sometimes you hit a wall with that person, and you need to walk away. And so it's like little pieces of wisdom that, again, my mom's an incredibly patient person. I've never learned that patience. And so it's like, I try to figure out, like, you know, all these ways. It's like, but it is a form of patience. You know, patience isn't just sitting and staying quiet. It's also doing something actively about it. I learned the other day that I'm not very good with quotes, so please don't quote me on this. But I read somewhere that it's a forgotten sunnah to not treat others based on your mood. So if you're in a bad mood, for example, and you just get really mad at somebody, we're so used to us being like emotionally invested in everything that if you're in a bad mood, you can just take it out on somebody else and then come back and say you're sorry. But then I learned that it's a forgotten sunnah not to do that. I mean, everyone knows to control your anger, and the strongest of you is the one who controls their anger, you know, stronger than a wrestler or whatever. But at the same time, it's like, but it never fully clicked to make the connection that it also includes not treating people based on your mood as well. Because at the end of the day, it's not their fault. Their ignorance, part of it is on them, but the other part of it is they don't even know. So here's a story for you. Because I don't like this like kind of lecturing you, telling you what to do, but here's a story. A few months ago, I read this news article about a high school principal who got suspended for sharing incredibly bad Facebook posts. Just really, really bad posts. You can use your imagination. They're very hateful, even though his school had a 500% increase in minorities. Can you believe that? 500%. That's how white Forsyth County is. And the thing is, I knew that principal. He was my principal for a year before he moved to this new school that just opened that my brother went to. I know for a fact that he has an MSA in that school. I know for a fact that my mom's daughters go to that school. And it was so shocking to me because I had met him right when he lost his little baby son. I had actually helped in a scholarship fundraiser for his baby son. And I was like, how can he write this stuff about Muslims? I was so upset, and I was so angry, and I was so hurt, and I was like, was all that work for nothing? So in my lovely, I like to write everything way, I wrote him an email, and I said, I don't know how I feel about what you posted. All I know is I always saw you as a man of character. I helped out in your son's fundraiser, and I don't understand why you think the way that you do about Muslims, because I am one. Can we sit down and have a conversation about it? And I sat there, I didn't think much of it. I was like, he's probably not going to think about it, whatever. He got reinstated a week and a half later, just to show you Forsyth County doesn't really you know, they know that if they fire a principal, it's going to be a lot worse. And I don't think that's just why they did it. I think if you fire somebody, it's not going to fix the problem. If you make them go, it'll just make them angrier, it'll make the people that support them angrier, and it won't fix the problem. So he sends me back an email, and he says, I can't believe you reached out to me. Yes, let's meet. It was like 2 weeks later or something, and we finally sat down. And when he and I were talking, he looks at me and he goes, I feel the need to personally apologize to you. I'm like, I'm not here for an apology. I just want to know what we can do to make sure that this kind of situation doesn't happen again. Because as a principal, when you say something like this, you justify every bully in the school and their behavior. He's like, I know, but I want to apologize to you personally. And then he looks at me and he goes, you know, it's funny that you reached out to me, and it's kind of sad. He's a very, like, devout Christian man. A lot of people are in Forsyth County. And he looks at me and he goes, I reached out to my pastor countless times, and you were the only person out of all the emails that I got to offer help. Because I didn't say anything. I just said, hey, if you need me to teach you about, like, Islam or teach you some diversity training, I know some organizations, let me know, we can talk about it. I was like, you know, he's not going to want to train, who cares? Like, I just wanted to see what happened. He goes, you were the only one to send me an email that wasn't either attacking me or supporting the things that I said, but actually asked for real change and how that change was going to happen. And I was so shocked, because it's like you only hear those stories in movies, right? Like, you hear about, like, oh, you know, at the end of the day, they all live together, like, happily ever after, or whatever. They fixed their problems, they talked about it, or there's always, like, this dramatic, like, scene where they all fight it out and then they walk away happy, like, get ice cream or something. But it was so shocking to me, one, that had I not done that, I mean, of course he had to take steps. The county mandated him to do diversity training for the teachers and everything. But I realized, had I not done that, it would have been something that was forced on him rather than something that he felt like, oh my gosh, this is somebody I knew and I hurt them too, right? Because at the end of the day, he was also hurting as a person because he lost his baby boy not even 6 or 7 years ago. So it's like he's dealing with his anger and his pain while also dealing with an entire school and situation. And then 2 weeks later, I get a text from one of my mom's friend's daughters. She messaged me on Instagram. She's like, what's your number? And I'm like, usually when people ask me for my number, that's never a good thing, like, especially so randomly, like, without any explanation. I'm like, here's my number. And she sends me a text. She goes, I just walked out of, Dr. Davison is his name. I just walked out of his office, and he personally apologized to the entire MSA. He asked us into his office, and he apologized to us personally, and he told us about all the next steps, and he's doing this, like, council of students that come from different backgrounds to come together and meet once a month, just to talk about, as a minority, how can we make your time in Forsyth better? And I was like, wait, he did that? Like, really? Because I thought, oh, we met, it was great, and that's it. Like, it's over. Next thing I know, 2 weeks after that, I get an email from the county director of, like, public relations, like, hey, we really want to do some kind of training for teachers. Can you help us out with that? I'm like, I can't personally do it for you because I'm not, like, a consultant. I'm not, like, I do consulting work, but I'm not at the point where I can train, like, an entire group of teachers, but there's this thing called the Islamic Speakers Bureau. Like, let me tell you more about it. And if you notice, I didn't take it on myself because I don't have the knowledge. And that's the other dangerous thing that some people kind of get caught up in is they want to be the person for all the answers, so they say, let me tell you this, rather than saying, you know what, I don't know, let me check on that for you. But that does even more harm than good. So I said, okay, stop, I don't know everything, let me send you to this organization, and then we can meet about it and go from there. And now they're doing diversity training for every teacher in the county, not just in that high school. Again, I'm not a director of an organization. And at the same time, I was one of the students that he was in a way hurting because he posted all these things. But at the same time, I realized it's not personal. It's not about me personally. It's about this concept that he doesn't understand. To him, Islam is nothing more than the enemy on the other side of the ocean. And two, when you're surrounded by ignorance, how are you supposed to know any better? If you're a fish in water, how do you know you're in water if you don't know what anything else is? Right? So, again, a lot of people ask me why I care so much about interfaith work. It's because of moments like this. Because had I not learned to talk to people that are different than me in a way that's respectful and understanding, I would have never been able to stop, turn around, and send that principal. By the way, I've never been to the principal's office. I've never talked to a principal. Like, usually it's just hi, bye in the hallway. Would have never got a chance to sit in the office and tell him, you know, I know what you did is wrong. Your apology isn't supposed to be for me. I don't want your apology. I'm not here for this battle of egos, right? I'm here for a way to move forward because we all live in this world together and we might as well learn how to do it well. So, in terms of where I am right now, I still do a lot of that. I still do a lot of interfaith work. I'm still a member of the Islamic Speakers Bureau. This presentation isn't like an official ISB presentation, but without the training that I got from that organization, I don't think I would have learned how to stand in front of people and talk to them in a way that's not personal. I don't think I would have understood how to do presentation skills. So that's why the next time, like if a teacher says, we're going to do presentations, we're going to work on your presentation skills, even if you're terrified of audiences, do it. Tell them to critique you, tell them to talk to you, tell them to do whatever, because I used to be the kind of person who could not, as like socialite, like I love talking to people, whatever, but I hated talking in front of groups. It just felt so weird to me. I was like, everyone's staring at me, like I'm gonna mess up, I'm gonna like ruin it, I'm gonna do whatever. I saw that, but like, you know what I mean? Like, but then there comes a point where you realize, okay, I love learning. Learning isn't just about books, it's also about gaining skills. So if I could like sum up this whole speech into maybe a couple points, the first is keep learning. Not just about other people, but about yourself and your identity. If you don't know what it means to be a Muslim, if you don't know what Islam is, you're never going to be able to teach people about it. 2, take care of yourself. You're never going to be able to take care of other people in the world around you if you don't take care of yourself. If you're ailing, you can't help the others. If you're sick, you can't help the sick. You have to take care of yourself first. And there's a very thin line between self-care and selfishness. So always keep an eye on that line. And 3, remember that it's not personal. It's not about you specifically. And the only actions you can control are your own. It's actually something I learned. I used to do this martial arts called Aikido, and they taught you that you can never control your opponent's actions. You can only control your own actions. So if somebody's coming at you, you can either push back, and I'm too small. Like there's no way I can win a fight with somebody who's much bigger than me. But if I move and do something unexpected, next thing you know, they'll be running into a wall behind you, right? Because you're moving their energy and using their energy against them. So you can never control your opponent. You can always control yourself. And 4th, not everybody's an opponent, right? That principal wasn't my enemy. Yes, he said some really horrible, awful things, but he wasn't my enemy. He was just somebody who literally didn't know any better. And I think my last one, if I could really kind of really come to this one, and it's, if you're a shy person, that's totally fine. You don't have to speak in front of groups of people. But just have the skill to do it. Be able to do it in case you're asked to do it. And if you're a very social, outgoing person, use that for other reasons than to kind of build your clique or kind of really get that group of friends, right? If you're a very social person and you see somebody sitting by themselves at a table in the cafeteria or even at the masjid, like I've seen this before where we all have our friends and there's like that one person we don't really know that well yet, invite them over. You'll be surprised because the greatest friends I ever made were people that I would have never spoken to had I not joined the clubs that I did or the organizations that I did or did whatever. So to kind of close out my story, I am now, so I worked at the Center for Civil and Human Rights for about a year, and I'm now at an organization called Points of Light, and what they do is they mobilize volunteers around the world. You're talking about like millions of volunteers, 30 million hours of service work every year. They're in 30 countries and 300 cities, and so they're a very huge organization. And it's funny because I wanted to join them just so I can learn a little bit about how to run nonprofits and really get into it before I go into grad school. And it turns out they need to create a faith track for their conference, basically interfaith work. And not a single one of them knows how to do interfaith work. SubhanAllah, like I get there and they're talking about like this big conference that only a select group of people work on, and next thing I know I'm like, you're doing that wrong. Like here's what I did for the past, it's crazy to say at 22 that I did something for 10 years, but I've been doing it since I was 12. I'm like, I've been doing interfaith work since I was 12. Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? And so I'm now there. I'm studying for the GRE at the same time. And originally I was, like I said, either I was going to be an engineer, doctor, or lawyer. Quit all of that. I want to go into foreign affairs and, inshallah, eventually go into diplomacy. It's kind of like a sort of like a super, super long off dream, but I really do want to become Secretary of State. Like, that's something I really want to do because it's true. Like, we kind of live microcosms of the world around us. Like, the idea of talking to people different than us, people do that on international levels all the time. Countries talk to each other, right? And if you learn how to do that in a really small space, you can learn how to do that in a much bigger space. So, give me your questions. I like questions. They're good.
So, what is it required to be Secretary of State?
Sorry, what was that?
What does it require to become a Secretary of
It requires a lot of work. So you definitely have to get some sort of higher education degree, whether it's a law degree, master's, preferably PhD, so either law or PhD. And anything that has either some sort of focus on law, as well as foreign affairs, diplomacy, public policy, etc. Now, once you get your degree, you have to gain skills to enter the State Department, and then the Secretary of State is basically the CEO of the State Department. So they're the highest person up there. And the reason they call them Secretary of State is because the State Department runs all of Homeland Security, they run diplomacy, they run all the ambassadors, they literally do all of that. And so that's why they report to the president, because the president's kind of this person who's in charge of all these little clubs under him, and all these little clubs have presidents. And so they report to him as secretaries and directors and things like that. So it's a very long road. I'm not saying it's 100% going to happen, but inshallah. Exactly.
I wanted to ask if this training program is for boys as well, or is for only?
Oh, the Islamic Speakers Bureau? Everybody.
Everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And also, is there something training locally we can send our girls or training boys to?
Yes, so they hold a training every year. There is a fee because they do spend time printing material and booking the space and things like that. They just had theirs in February, so be on the lookout for them to start advertising it sometime in November.
How do we find out?
So the best way I can recommend is to go on isbatlanta.org, because there's a lot of different Islamic Speakers Bureaus. There's one in Tennessee, California, etc. Go on their website and join their mailing list. And also, feel free to forward me your email and I can send it to them.
You said you weren't sure where and how you got your strength, but that was a really early age for you to think about going into interfaith. So my son is around the same age, he's 13. And he's constantly getting bombarded with these those few questions and it's like his whole energy is getting, invested into just answering them back. And sometimes I feel like, is there a resource that he can go to so exactly how he knows how to answer?
So the Islamic Speakers Bureau also offers another workshop called Straight Talk, which is kind of a hybrid of their meaningful conversations. And what it is it's a mini training. You can ask for it whenever you want. You just go online, you request a presentation, and they've done it at RCM, they've done it at Hamza. What they do is they'll go in and, preferably without parents, just because kids talk a lot more openly if parents aren't there, and they ask them, what are some things you've been experiencing? It's almost like a mini counseling session, honestly. But the most important part is once they kind of get all of that out of the way, they also do, okay, you've dealt with this, what are some resources you can look to? Who do you report it to? How do you handle it? When do you handle it? Things like that. And so, training is to either, the ISB training itself is to either become a speaker or just really kind of take those skills. Straight Talk is specifically for teenagers. Whenever, if you guys want to do it as a masjid or something and do a hanafa in the evening, they'll come in and do it whenever you want. So I think that's actually incredibly invaluable, just because being able to sit in a room and hear about. When you're in a room full of people that are similar than you, you assume they're going through the same thing, but hearing it out loud, talked about out loud, especially from, there are people in there that are engineers and doctors and whatever, so it's I don't know, it's really inspiring to hear it coming from them, just to kind of say, look, we're not your age, but there's everyone here in the room that's like you, but you can get to my place while also kind of keeping your identity. Because
can we get ISB into, I don't know if there's an avenue or platform that you could arrange for them to go into school?
Absolutely.
Like a seminar kind of, a workshop kind of?
They do all of that. They do schools, they do religious houses of worship, they do everything, and they have different...
open to, everyone?
Yes. So, go ahead.
Okay, so, I'm secretary of my school's MSA, so we're really interested in starting interfaith events in our school, especially after a couple instances where some kids came up to me, told me terrorists and a lot of other things. But how do we get started on that track to interfaith?
I always say the best way to bring people together is food. Food is good. Everyone loves food. Pizza is delicious. And so it's kind of hard to get people out into a service project, especially if it's not required and, school takes up your whole day. So my first recommendation is to do co-host it with your fellow Christian athletes, so FCA, if you have a Jewish student union, anything like that. Reach out to their presidents, and they might ignore you for a while just because they're also busy, whatever, but literally walk up to them in the hallway and say, look, we face bullying in different ways, whether it's because of our physical attributes or our religious attributes or cultural attributes or whatever. Let's find a way we can get the school to pay for it, get a teacher to pay for it, whatever, and let's do a little pizza party and just have people come in and talk together. And you'll notice you might not see results the day you're sitting there in that whatever, but when that person goes to their friend and goes, I went for this thing for extra credit. That's the other thing. Ask your teachers to provide extra credit. Like, do an actual, like, institutional reinforcement of it. Like, ask teachers to provide extra credit. Ask people to make it mandatory. Do something that'll actually make people go there. And what you'll notice is people will leave going, I didn't know that. And then they'll go talk to their friends and be like, did you know about this and this and this? And that friend might dismiss them and go, oh, don't talk to them. They're, dirty, whatever, insert subculture group. But that person's still thinking, right? And they're still talking. They're still wondering. So you followed it up. I know it's kind of late in the semester, but then you followed up with another event. This time a little longer with a more specific conversation. Instead of just let's all mingle and talk to each other, it's let's talk about misconceptions about each other's faiths, right? And so you start out in this sort of very shallow place, and you move the conversation deeper and deeper and deeper.
You're talking about the bullying from the other faith, but sometimes the bullying comes within the faith. Then how you deal with the same person that follows your faith. So that happens a lot. Of
course.
The kids come and say that.
So I don't know how much bullying seminars still focus on this. But one of the things we always learned was bullying isn't about you, it's about the other person. It means that the other person is hurting, right? And when you're in that situation of being bullied, you don't care if the other person's hurting. You're like, I just want them to stop hurting me. Like, it's not my responsibility they're hurting. So in that situation, if you're being physically harmed, go report it immediately. If whoever you go tell doesn't believe you, go to somebody else that'll believe you. Keep going to different people until somebody believes you. Because physical harm, unfortunately, gets to a much more dangerous place. If it's still verbal, stop the conversation, ask the person, why are you doing what you're doing? Just ask them why. They'll probably say, oh, because you're a loser, you're this, you're that. You're like, no, I want to understand, why do you think that way about me? Just literally, if you keep asking why, eventually you drive them crazy. It's actually very interesting to see how people, because honestly, how often do you do something and you think about it so deeply that you can answer 5 levels of why about it, right? So just keep asking why, and then sometimes that may not work. They might just walk away and get angry, but as long as they walk away from you, you've diffused the situation. No offense, but I don't believe in having adults involved until, like I said, if there's physical harm or if the verbal abuse gets to a point where you feel like you're mentally or emotionally getting to a point where you're like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. That's when you need to go see an adult. But try to diffuse the situation yourself. Try to figure out, okay, how do I handle this? Because as crazy as it sounds, there comes a point where your parents can't really help you out in everything, right? If you're working or if you're doing something or whatever, that's within a very, very closed institution, you can't really just tell your parents to come in and talk to the HR lady, right? It has to be you. So start out kind of diffusing the situation, and if that doesn't work, absolutely go to a parent, absolutely go to an authority figure, because sometimes it may get dangerous. And I don't mean to say this just to scare people, but when you're in a group of people, especially if it's a group of people bullying people, they kind of egg each other on, and they might have wanted to start here, and they end up all the way over there. And unfortunately, this just happened with a high schooler. She got into a fight with some students, and they literally, the physical violence of it got so much, they actually killed her. This is not an exaggeration. This is not to scare people, but it's just to say, if it's physical, immediately go to somebody else. But if it's verbal, try to diffuse it. And if you can't, if it continues, get an authority figure involved. And honestly, I know we don't really like to talk about this, but maybe find a counselor that you guys can sit with together, whether it's at your school or in a mentor or something, and have a counseling session. You never know, you might actually help that other person deal with problems that they didn't want to deal with.
So some of the most common misunderstandings are probably around the Islam supports violence, and another thing would be that jobs are oppressed or something like that. So for those misunderstandings and the other most common ones, how do you respond to something?
So you've all heard the expression lead by example, right? Or you'll hear Prophet Muhammad was a walking Quran, right? You hear that all the time. That's literally my answer to you. I remember I had a teacher in 8th grade who said, I thought you were going to be this really quiet, really kind of shy girl, and you proved me wrong within 5 minutes, right? Because I talk a lot. But at the same time, it doesn't mean change who you are as a person. If you're quiet, and if you're one of those people who's very calm, and I kind of wish I could be like that, right? I really do, then keep that part of you. Just because it's a misconception doesn't mean you should change it just so you can prove other people wrong. So, but at the same time, you can also prove them wrong in other ways, by your intellect, by your capabilities, and by your abilities. If you're an amazing artist, you've already changed the perception. You don't have to like run around the hallway going, look at my art, right? But at the same time, like, invest in your abilities. If you're a great mathematician, enter math bowls. If you're a great artist, enter, art shows. If you, I don't know, if you're a great writer, enter essay contests. Just by being in these places that Muslims don't normally think about, you've already proved people wrong. Without changing your personality, by the way. I have questions. What else? Yes.
Okay, so another problem that we're having with MSA is we aren't getting as many Muslims involved as we'd like to. We have so at our school we have 40 hijabis. All of them are on the emailing list, but only the officers show the meeting. So how do I get more of the Muslim kids in our school to get, because we have like a really sizable Muslim population, but they just don't show. How do I get them to come to the meetings?
So one of the biggest mistakes I made when I was very young was to be too serious. You know what I mean? I mean, it's true. Like, some kids are just really, really goofy, and some kids are just super serious. So for me, it was all like, we gotta get this work done, we have to do this, we have to plan this, we have to do that. And I never really focused on doing things that other kids my age were doing. Like, let's just go out for ice cream. Let's go watch a movie. Let's go do this. Let's go do that. You know what I mean? Like, there was so many activities. Let's go to the park. It's so beautiful outside. Like, go somewhere. Go to some mountain. Go hike a trail. Go do something. Because once they see that just because they join an MSA, it's not all meetings and work and paperwork and preparing for Miss and not preparing for Miss. And then once you're done with Miss, it's like Miss National. And then once you're done with Miss National, it's Miss Regional again. And you know what I mean? Like, I feel like in clubs, this is something I have to learn. We get so caught up in recruitment and planning events and things like that. Again, we forget to take care of ourselves. And in this case, it's the group in the majority. So reach out to them. Do a doodle poll. Be like, when are you most available, right? And then figure that out. So do a doodle poll. It's like this really awesome thing where you just pick times that you're available, and then everyone picks times within that, and then you pick the most popular time, and go do something. Just go and talk. Be a support group for each other. Like I said, without going to a halaqah, I probably would not have ended up where I am. Like, I have 3 younger siblings. My brother didn't handle bullying very well, and part of that is because he wasn't interested in being around kids his age, and 2, kids that were like him, that were Muslim, living in America, whatever. So you make sure that you provide an anchor that if they don't want to do some of the work, they at least have a space to go. Same thing like, the idea of the masjid, you always hear this all the time. Like, the masjid is kind of like a hospital. You don't accept people who are already healthy into it, right? It's like, there's a reason you need a hospital. So, same concept. So and again, but it's also moderation. So don't just only do fun and games and only the officers end up doing the work. But, if you're doing this, I don't know, you go out for ice cream, go out for coffee or something, and you're sitting and you're talking about your life and your day-to-day, and then you go, and the last 5 or 10 minutes, be like, I was thinking, this was really nice, there's a lot of good energy here, oh, you're a great artist, you're a great writer, you're whatever, would you mind writing a newsletter for us? Would you mind designing the t-shirt for us? Would you mind running our Facebook page? You know what I mean? Like, everyone has their passions. You won't learn what those passions are unless you hang out with them and talk to them as people. Then once you find that out, incorporate those passions into the organization. And then kind of go from there. Because at that point, they'll enjoy the work they're doing, right? It's not just a meeting. It's, let me show off this thing I'm really proud of. Like, I made this awesome t-shirt. Let me show it to you. So.
One thing I wanted to add, maybe you can invite her to invite excitement.
I would be honored.
One more question. How do you start the conversation in an office setting?
In a what? In an office setting? So I just joined a new organization, and so it's like, it was maybe 2 or so again, like I said, I'm a very social person, so I learned everybody's names. Like, it's so big that I still can't learn everybody's names, but I tried so hard. Like, every person I saw, I'm like, I'm really sorry, can you remind me of your name again? Can you remind me of your name again? And then I started sharing things I'm really passionate about. So in this case, we had, Oglethorpe invites all the alumni back for like an alumni weekend where we all meet on the quad and we just like catch up and everything. Like, what's your Oglethorpe story? Where are you now? So I started talking about how much I loved Oglethorpe and this event that was coming up, and then I started asking, so, what do you do outside of work? How do you do this? And they're like, oh, I do this and this and this, and I'll say, oh, that's really cool. I'm part of this organization, and actually I also go to a mosque, and here's the mosque I go to, and you kind of do it in a way that's like, here's what I'm involved in, and here's what I'm passionate about, right? And then you open up the conversation to, I usually talk about like how we recently had the visit on mosque day. It was like 2 or 3 month and a half ago. Yeah, and I said, we actually just had a visit on mosque day, and we ended up getting a lot more people than we expected. It was very interesting to see people ask questions. If you ever have any questions about Islam, please feel free to ask them. I'm not the kind of person who gets offended. And then just like leave it open. And then next thing you know, that like literally it was like a switch that went off, and Beth goes, yeah, I've been meaning to ask you like about your scarf and how do you do it and why do you do it, just like that. But again, I've been there 7 weeks now, and it took almost 3.5. So I had to just start out with, let me get to know you as people, and then let's talk about the big stuff. Unfortunately, in today's world, it's all political. So to them it's like, oh, it's kind of like talking politics, right? So it's like, okay, how do I get to a point where it's not just politics, it's also personal? I had the immense pleasure of emceeing the benefit dinner, United Benefit Dinner, and Daniel Mogahed was there. And she was talking about how Muslims are so caught up with talking about what they're not, that they haven't had a chance to talk about what they are. And so recently, Bernie Sanders was invited to go talk at the Vatican. He's Jewish, Vatican's Christian, about moral economy, moral finances. But Islam is so, has such an extensive, history and jurisprudence on nothing but, economics and financial responsibility. And no one thought to invite a Muslim person because in our frame of mind right now, it's all about what are Muslims not. If it's a panel about violence, if it's a panel about integration, if it's a panel about whatever, there's always a token Muslim. But if it's about financial services, if it's about what does being morally and financially responsible mean? No one thought of that. And she's like, it's now time to move past what Muslims aren't to what Muslims are. So that's been very hard for me to do right now.
How can you differentiate between a bullying and a normal conflict? Sometimes you don't know, you don't realize.
Mm-hmm. So there's different shades of it, right? The most obvious form of bullying is if somebody is in a higher position than you are. So if it's a teacher, absolutely report that. Don't even try to mitigate that conflict. Report it immediately. If it's anybody who's above you in any organization, if it's somebody who's bigger than you and physically coming at you. But then the other part of it is, if somebody makes a joke I don't know, people make short jokes to me all the time, and I'm short, so it's fine, whatever, I got used to it. But if somebody keeps relentlessly saying, oh, look at you, you're a midget, oh, look at you, you're short, and you tell them, hey, look, I know you're just kidding, but it really upsets me, can you please stop? But if they keep doing it, and it goes from being a joke to being serious, that's bullying. Now, again, it depends. Some people are more sensitive than others, so also make sure that you communicate that. It's hard to tell somebody to stop, because more than not, it'll make them do it more often, but just be like, look, I'm actually very serious, please stop. And if they don't, then it becomes bullying. So it doesn't always have to be you're a terrorist. It can also be I don't know, your nose looks funny. I don't know. Just trying to figure out things I don't like.
I had a question about the Salah. How do you plan your day around the Salah when you're at work or at school?
Sure. I'm not in school anymore, but in our office, I went to our HR director and I told her, as Muslims, we pray 5 times a day. Most of my prayers are not during work, but I do have certain prayers that are during work. And she showed me a small closet space. It's actually the server room where I can just go and pray. So that's usually, even in middle school, I went directly to the counselor and I asked her. In high school, same thing. A teacher just let me use the classroom during lunch breaks. In college, it was just kind of finding a quiet place in the library. So I can't focus. If somebody's walking, it's not that I'm ashamed. It's that I know if somebody's walking, they don't know what I'm doing, they're gonna try to talk to me, and I don't want to be rude and not be able to respond back, and for them to go, what is she, it's just weird, right? So I try really hard to make it a secluded, quiet place. But it's a good conversation starter. So, yeah.
So I'm a pretty extroverted person, also very social. So a lot of times in school, I am talking to people about myself and my religion and things, but I feel like I come off as weird, or I'm just a weird person. How do I sort of make it so that they don't feel strange around me?
Sure. So the simplest thing is to not make it personal. Like, don't say I believe, I do this, we do this. Don't make that the barrier that you're you and I'm me. And we're talking about different things. Just say Muslims believe this, Islam teaches this, the Quran says this, you know, etc., etc., etc. Keep it very objective. The other thing is, I was the weird, annoying kid in school, right? I was that person. I always felt uncomfortable in who I was and everything that I did. And as cliche, this is so cliche, I now get people messaging me from high school apologizing for being jerks to me. You know what I mean? Like 4 or 5 years later. It's always... The problem with cliche stories is you're like, this is really stupid and cliche, but the thing is, they happen, and they're cliche because they're based on real events. And so, going back to what I said earlier, don't change your personality just because somebody around you doesn't like it. Because at the end of the day, if they really matter, they'll continue to be a part of your life and continue to keep in touch with you. And if they don't matter, once you're out of high school, no one cares. I mean, I'm sorry, but like those kids that bullied me on the bus, I can't even remember their faces anymore. I remember one had like really blonde hair, but that was it. Like that's literally all I can remember. But other than that, like they just don't matter. So, I'm seeing, looking at time. Oh, okay.
You seem so natural at all of this, and it just look like it's so simple. Everybody can do it. But did you get like this over a period of time, or you got your strength with every incident that happened, or how did you end up where you are?
Again, like I said, I don't want to say I have a strong personality. I don't know. I was so, like, I remember especially when I was younger, I was so into, like, learning about, like, Islam and what it means to be a Muslim and just, like, really, really focusing on that. And I was part of Khatibas Halaqa, actually. And she used to always tell us, like, whatever you want to do, pray istikhara about it, right? And always have an open line of communication with you and your Lord, right? It's like this idea that, and I remember it was kind of like one of those nights where you're just really upset, you're really crying, no one's really understanding what you're saying, and I just kind of made dua and I said, you know, if all of this is for nothing, then take it out of my life. But if it's for a reason, then keep it there, right? And it was, again, I was 13. I don't know how I even thought about saying something so, like, wise or whatever, but like I said, it's find inspiration in those moments and don't let them break you, because of course I cried. Like, of course I went home and cried about those kids bullying me. Of course I wanted to take off my hijab at one point. Of course I was so sick and tired of it. Like, but at the same time, it was one of those things where it was like, it wasn't that it got easier, it was just, I learned better arguments, right? I don't want to keep it in a point of conflict, because it's not just conflict, it's just you get to a point where where you realize it's not you, it's them, and you're like, you know what, if I can help you get to a better place, great. And if after all this work nothing happens, then you're just like that for a reason that doesn't have anything to do with me. It's just, you're just looking for a reason to take out your anger. I'm that reason right now. I'm sorry you feel that way, but time for me to walk away. And that's the hardest thing for me, is to be able to give up. And so, did I become this way over time? I feel like I've kind of always been this way, but have my arguments gotten better? Yes. Am I well-spoken? Yes. Faith-wise, it's like the spiritual roller coaster. Like 1 minute I'm up, 1 minute I'm down, 1 minute I'm up. It's just one of those things where it's like, the more you learn to listen to yourself, and the more you learn, and the more you're willing to ask, I think you'll kind of get to this point too. It doesn't have to be talking in front of people. Like I said it before, not everyone's outgoing, not everyone's, like, some of the best leaders I've met are those people that are doing all the quiet, hard work in the background, right? And you barely hear them, but they do amazing stuff. So, it's kind of like a little bit of both. But definitely reach out to the ISB and do the straight talk workshop. I think it'll be very helpful to actually give, like, real tools and examples and everything.
It's sometimes on TVs on anchors come and they talk about the ISB approaches them and they want to come and represent Islam or something like that. Because most of the time they bring those people, like, well, it's from the other Hamakas, like Jamaat Islami or Ismailis or something. Like, actually bringing a Muslims over there, does ISB approach them or like that?
So, remember how I said, if you have a talent, show it off? And if you have a capability, go to that institution and do it. This is why. We don't have a lot of Muslims in marketing. You know, we don't have a lot of Muslims in news. We don't have a lot of Muslims in media. And so, the reason those groups, they're small, they're very different, you know, they're inspired by this faith, they're kind of very different from this faith. It's like this really weird place to be. But I feel like the difference in their case is they try to put as many people as possible in as many places as possible, right? So we grew up with this idea that you should become an engineer, doctor, whatever. But then how many of them say, you should probably think about becoming a news anchor or a journalist or things like that. So unfortunately with anchors, you can't just call them up and say, I want to send somebody to talk on your show. But at the same time, if you're like every now and then it's like this really silly, stupid show called The Burt Show that I'll hear on when I drive in the morning. And one morning, it was right after Donald Trump was saying we need to keep all the Muslims out, and I just randomly went on Twitter and I tweeted at them and I said, I heard you're thinking about calling in some Muslims. I know some really great people you should call. They're like, well, we don't want an organization, but you should come on. And for an hour, I got to talk to like, I don't even know how many millions of listeners it was, about nothing but Islam and Muslims. But had I not been in marketing and a marketing consultant at that time, and on Twitter and on Facebook, and actually honing those skills that my parents were like, what are you doing on social media all day? I'm like, people get paid to do this. Like, they get, you know what I mean? Had I not learned to do that, I would have never gotten in that panel. So again, it's not just that the ISB isn't doing enough work. I mean, Sumaya Khalifa gets invited to stuff all the time. There's only so much she can do as well. So I guess kind of being present, being aware, but also like, I don't know, kind of starting to create those connections and things like that, I think goes even further than just a phone call and saying, get me on your show. Because that's how they get on their show. So, I don't know if you guys saw, but the Mormon community here in the United States did a whole, it was this huge marketing push that they did, right? It was like, meet a Mormon or I am Mormon or something.
Yeah,
and it was, yeah. And it was like all these like commercials, right? And all of a sudden Mormons went from being these like weird people that no one talked about to them understanding that, oh, they're just like us, right? And now you see like in the Muslim community, alhamdulillah, it's finally happening. People who love art and design and things like that are finally coming together and saying, you know what, that flyer, even though it's for this one event, it needs to look perfect. Because we need to look perfect because then people will come to us. So a lot of it is perception.
Like in my school, like some of the more like difficult interactions that I've had aren't with like people of other faiths, but like Muslims at my school that I know are, but like they kind of try to hide it or whatever. So like, how do you interact with them?
So let's see. So when I got to college, like I said, there was only one other hijab girl in my school. There were a lot of Muslims, but like you said, they don't really identify. And when they first met me, they thought I was going to be that person that would judge them. You know, if they did anything remotely wrong, I was going to be the person that would like follow them in the Quran and like beat them over the head with it. Like literally, like some of them thought this way. They thought I was going to do that. And it wasn't anything I did. They didn't know me. I didn't know them. And so what I did was, instead of inviting them to the MSA, if we were in class together, I'd be like, hey, can we work on this project together? You know, I don't really know what's going on, you know? Or, hey, that's a really cool design. Like, what are you working on? Or, oh god, I think one time it was like a flavor, like we like the same flavor of donuts. You know what I mean? Like some people aren't as comfortable with that shell and that identity just yet. And so I feel like if you force them into it, if you walk up to them and all you talk about is, oh my gosh, this hijab makes me so hot, you know what I mean? And it's like this girl that doesn't cover, she's gonna feel like you're just kind of, you don't mean it that way, but she's gonna feel like you're just kind of like poking her, like, hey, you should probably put this on too, you know what I mean? And so like, I made sure that if it was like, if I want to say anything related to Islam, it would be about a conversation like, oh my god, do you hear what they said about like Muslims in the airport, or, you know, this TSA agent when we were flying did this, like, kind of things that kind of relate to our shared identity, but only after we created this, well, we're fellow Oglethorpe students at Oglethorpe, so let's start here and again work our way up. And I know it's like, you guys keep asking me the same questions, I can't keep giving you the same advice, but that really is how it goes. It's never something you do, it's about the other person. And you can't control how they behave, so, you know, just start from the beginning. You know, don't befriend them because they're Muslim, figure out who they are as a person first. And you never know how you can inspire them. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I just had a shaving. I went outside to get my girl, and one of my girls, she was like, you know, I'm shy, I don't want to come in, and so many others looking at me. And while listening to you, may Allah keep you steadfast, preserve observe you. She made this. I just wanted to show you.
Oh,
She's flying for the president, So
awesome.
this sharing, this certainly helps, our Ummah, it certainly helps the community as an overall. So keep doing the great job that you're doing, mashallah.
Thank you. I don't know if you guys knew this, but flying paper airplanes is actually a worldwide championship. No, seriously, like there's a professor. No, like somebody got their doctorate. Yeah, somebody got their doctorate. I think it's like aerodynamics or like something like that. Like this is like a real worldwide phenomenon. So she might have found her niche. I don't know. Cool. Yes. Yes.
So, sorry for so many questions.
You're fine.
But, we have this one or two Hindus in our MSA, and they're really, really excited about Islam. But the deal is that we don't do so much because of the fact that it's our first year as an MSA, and so many people don't show. So how do we keep on encouraging them to be excited about Islam? Because I feel like their excitement has sort of dulled out over the course of the school year because we're not doing so much. So how do we keep it?
Same thing I told you earlier. Take them out for events, but also, I'll be honest with you, you're kind of really, really lucky because that Hindu girl I talked about in high school, even though we shared a lot, her family didn't allow me into their house. Just because, you know how no, this is a real socio-political religious conflict. Like some people are still stuck in that time period. And so, it's kind of like if you keep pulling from the same source, you're going to deplete that source. So find different ways to pull them in. It doesn't have to be focused on Islam. Have you asked them about Hinduism? Have you asked them to share parts about their culture? Have you asked them to share even something as simple as food, right? I know it's a Muslim student association, but if they're coming to learn about you, shouldn't you at least learn a little bit about them and understand where they're coming from? Because then maybe, just maybe, you'll better understand why they're even there to begin with. Jazakallah khair.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We have so many lessons to take home today. If you want to sum up in just like few sentences, number one was, anyone just raise their hand. Number one point was keep learning, right? Ask questions, a lot of questions. If people come up to you and look at you strangely, just ask them, okay? Asking questions is a good thing, a good way of finding things out. And number two was, if you know the answer,
Learn
is
about them.
take care of yourself. Very good. What was it?
Learn about them before you.
Yes. Yeah. That was one of the points. Like, not everyone is your opponent. Okay, you'll definitely find someone who will support you. And anything else? The golden words which we take home today.
On the actions you can control are your own.
Yes. Control your actions.
Expand the horizon, think beyond being doctors and everything, and become
Yeah. You could become a speaker too. Yeah, a good speaker. And if you're shy, if you still don't like to speak in public, but you need to learn. Just when someone comes up to you, you should be able to answer. Just for the sake of answering others, be ready with those answers and gain knowledge. Okay? Though you may not be a good public speaker, but it's always good to be prepared with answers. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us strength to lead by best examples. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Jazakallah khair. We have like 15 minutes before we start Maghrib Salat, so we have some tea and some refreshments. Jazakallah khair again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.